Today on WrestleJuice, we're going to go back in time 4 whole years and take a look at AEW in 2021 and ask the question, was AEW in 2021 better than it is here in 2025? We're going to look at a variety of things, but the reason I'm doing this video is because I saw a conversation on the Twitter this morning as I was having my coffee, because there were some people talking about AEW back in 2021 versus what's going on today. And then I saw this tweet, and this tweet seemed to be kind of a flashpoint for some conversation. This person, Noah Gilbert, said, quote unquote, 2021 AEW. Sure, bro. And it's an underwhelming match graphic here. Dante Martin and Matt Sydal versus Cody Rhodes and Lee Johnson. He followed up by saying, by the way, my point isn't that AEW in 2021 was trash. I loved it in 2021. But like anything, people romanticize it. Yeah, that's true. You actually see this quite a bit. For example, with the Attitude Era, how there seems to be two lines of thought on the Attitude Era. Either people think it was the most amazing thing ever, or people think it was wildly overrated and kind of trash. And in fact, the truth lies, as it usually does, somewhere in between. As somebody who was in college during the Attitude Era, I can tell you, God damn, that was some exciting television. It was loads of fun. The energy was off the charts. And then you go back and you watch a bunch of it today and you're like, what the fuck? What was this? A lot of matches barely went over 3 minutes. There was like basically no women's division back then. I mean, not really anyways. There kind of was. Anyways, the Attitude Era was a ton of fun and the energy in wrestling was unmatched at the time. But yeah, if you go back and you break down the minutia of it, left a little bit to be desired. In any event, fast forward to 2021, and AEW was firing on all cylinders. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting today, take a look at AEW in 2021 and why I think they're in a better position now, even though they're not experiencing the highs of 2021, nor are they experiencing the lows of AEW in 2021. It's wild to me, by the way, that like it's already 2025 and we're doing think pieces on something that happened 4 years ago. But people do that. It's like, I don't know, not long ago, people started waxing nostalgic for WWE 2019. Or not waxing nostalgic, but referencing 2019 as if it was that long ago, and it kind of was. It feels like a lifetime ago anyways. So, AEW in 2021. There really was nothing like it in terms of something that felt like it might actually be competition to WWE. A lot of wrestling fans looked at AEW back in 2021 as the culmination of the momentum that started back in 2019 when they began as a company. Of course, they sort of sprang from the Being the Elite YouTube vlog series of all things. And of course, the stuff that was going on that was really popular back in New Japan at the time, and Ring of Honor to a degree as well. But New Japan had really captured the zeitgeist in pro wrestling back in 2017 and 2018. And then along comes Tony Khan, and before WWE was able to sink their teeth into the Elite, he comes in and says, hey, I'll just give you a company with my money. And he kind of did that. He made the Elite EVPs, and then, the rest was history. It was a really booming, thriving independent scene at the time, and AEW kind of just took all that. And they were like, we'll put it on cable television because people seem to like this on the independent ranks. And so they started building this momentum, and it was like an actual alternative to the dog shit product that Vince McMahon was running in WWE. If you remember back in 2019, and then good Lord, especially during the pandemic era of 2020, when they were doing those performance center shows, God damn it. That was when at the time, my job as a content creator for wrestling stuff was really, really being put to the test because God, it was horrible. And then they did the Thunderdome thing and the creative was still crap. And then it was still crap. Like Vince really at that point had no idea what he was doing. And along comes AEW and it's like, well, wait a second. These guys are taking stuff that we kind of wish Vince would do. And they're just doing it on cable television with like a giant budget. It was kind of like, oh man, it'd be great if like all the cool shit happening in NXT was like on main roster. And then AEW was kind of doing that. So by the time 2021 came around, it was like, hey, we're bringing crowds back because the pandemic thing is starting to wane, or at least people stopped caring as much about it. And now we can see AEW in its fully realized form. And goddamn, Did it fully realize the form? Let's go over the pros. So early in the year at Revolution, Sting debuted. Now he debuted in like a cinematic match where he teamed up with Darby Allin versus, I think, like Brian Cage, and was there a Lance Archer in there? I forget who it was. And it was like, oh, cool, we're going to get some cinematic matches with Sting. And then he actually started doing real wrestling matches. And they were like, awesome. And he would like jump off really high things. And it was like, ooh, what's going on right now? Sting's last run really was pretty great. And his relationship with Darby was pretty awesome. So that was really cool. Obviously, I just mentioned this. At Double or Nothing is when they brought the crowds back after COVID. So that was kind of nice to see people. Kenny Omega's belt collector gimmick. Of course, he won the AEW World title in December of 2020, and then he just started collecting a bunch of titles. He got like the Mega Championship in AAA, and he got like the TNA Championship, I believe, and then Christian took it off him, which was weird. Later in the year, of course, Hangman Adam Page won the world title, culminating his story, which was basically from the inception of AEW, leading us to believe that he is, in fact, the main character of AEW, and that looks to be on the horizon again with the All-In situation there with Jon Moxley. It seems like Hangman's going to win this. They always had terrific matches. I mean, since its inception, AEW's pay-per-views, with the exception of maybe being a little bit on the long side, really deliver. The wrestling is always really, really good. But let's talk about All Out that year, because, oh my God, this might be one of the most important shows, definitely the most important show in AEW's history. But check this out. CM Punk had his first match back, his first match in AEW, and his first match wrestling in what I think it was 7 years or so. It was against Darby Allin. He had come back a couple weeks earlier at the first Rampage, or the second Rampage, whichever Rampage it was. They called it the first dance. And it was huge. CM Punk back in wrestling after kind of maybe flirting with it, doing that WWE backstage thing back in 2019. He came back to wrestling in a company that was kind of custom made for him. We'll get back to that in a second. At that show also, of course, Adam Cole debuted. Adam Cole coming off of an insane 2019 where he was voted Wrestler of the Year by like a bunch of people, including myself. And then in 2020, there was a rumor that Vince wanted to bring him up as a manager to Keith Lee and change his name and have him cut his hair. Those are all rumors. I don't know how much they've been substantiated or not, but it was terrifying at the time because it was like, no, you can't do that to Adam Cole. Well, Adam Cole was allowed to be Adam Cole in AEW when he decided to sign there. Same with Bryan Danielson, who had just main evented WrestleMania like, 6 months earlier, where he was stacked by Roman Reigns along with Edge. And then apparently Vince was furious that he didn't re-sign with WWE. Instead, went to AEW. Again, a company whose roots could be traced back to Ring of Honor, where Danielson had, just a legendary career as well. So it was like, oh my God, we're going to get Bryan Danielson free from, the constraints of Vince McMahon and the way he was doing things. Ruby Soho also debuted there. You also had the Lucha Bros versus the Young Bucks in that steel cage match, like one of the best tag matches of all time. And so AEW, it felt like a real, actual turning point in pro wrestling because Vince was still in charge of WWE. And as you saw all this amazing stuff happen in AEW, you saw like a bunch of creative bullshit happening in WWE where none of the characters really were all that interesting. The stories were kind of meandering. You'd get rematch after rematch. There was that one period of time when Vince was insistent on every match being like a 2 out of 3 falls match. And then like it had something to do with commercials. I don't know. It was weird. He was getting so weird towards the end. And then it was the next year that he got booted out of the company. Kind of. He sort of came back and then he was booted out again for good. And then they sold it and was booted out again that time for good. Whatever it was. In any event, the creative of WWE was on a downswing. It was not a fun company, and AEW was. And I know there were some people at the time who were like, wow, if this continues and this continues, then at some point AEW might actually be challenging WWE when it comes to like ratings, viewership, and stuff like that. I don't know if I ever really firmly believed that because WWE had such a head start. Billion-dollar company. Like, there was a lot that they, I think, probably could have done in order to keep AEW off them. But AEW kind of did that themselves because AEW in 2021, for the kind of highs that they experienced, it wasn't really a situation that was built to continue an upward momentum. For all the highs it had, it wasn't all good, as this, what was his name? Noah Gilbert points out, there is still plenty of like not great stuff, including, you see him right there, Cody Rhodes, who right now, of course, is like the biggest deal in WWE. Cody really didn't find his way in AEW. First off, he like wrote himself out of the world title picture as an EVP. And then like around 2020, 2021, he was doing that weird, I think it was like 2021, he was doing this weird like meta heel thing where like he was sort of pissing people off by teasing going heel, but not really doing it. And then in that, he felt that that was being a bad guy, but it was just sort of being annoying and like not really telling good stories. So Cody was sort of like not even really part of the fun shit going on in AEW. He just sort of stuck out like a sore thumb. He was trying to make something out of that TNT title, and his matches were always really good. But from a storyline perspective, it was always like, what is happening right now? This is kind of bizarre. So there was Cody Rhodes. There was also like really bizarre production issues. If you guys remember, especially back in 2021, for some reason, like the cameras wouldn't catch certain big moments happening, or like the audio issues would like happen every single week on Dynamite. There was that exploding barbed wire match that finished with like literally like a fizzle, the whole Mox Kenny thing. And then Eddie Kingston comes out and he like puts himself on Mox. It was all really silly stuff. They didn't really devote a lot of time to their women's division either. It was like the entire women's division was just Britt Baker and Thunder Rosa the entire time. And like they didn't really devote a lot of time to that. Rampage debuted and it was a big deal because CM Punk was there, but then it really quickly became their Thunder. And then like this was something that I didn't hear a lot of people talking about, but to me was a big issue. They only had 4 pay-per-views a year, which some people still would prefer they go back to that. But in between the pay-per-views, they had a really hard time pacing their stories. So stories would either be told like way too quick and then dropped, or way too slowly and people would get bored with it. The pacing issues with AEW have been corrected recently, but back in 2021, they were pretty glaring. So the question that we're asking here is, what would you prefer? To have a company that has super high highs and really low lows, or a company like they are today, which is built to last? Now, I said this earlier, AEW at the time, seemingly to me, was kind of a house of cards, where you've got names like Kenny Omega, who had already been wrestling for, 15, 20 years at the time, and wrestling a really physical style that entire time, and whose body was completely breaking down. Chris Jericho, who by 2021... I know he still had plenty of fans, but you could tell that the shtick was starting to grow a little bit on the tired side. You had Adam Cole, who, unbeknownst to a bunch of us, was going to end up being kind of injury prone. Cody Rhodes, who had written himself out of relevancy pretty quickly after AEW started. Bryan Danielson, who also was only really a couple of years away from his body kind of breaking down on him and him basically retiring from full-time work. And then CM Punk, who we all thought, oh my God, this company's kind of custom made for this guy. But it turns out Tony Khan just sort of gave him the keys to the company and was like, yeah, Punk, you just sort of do whatever you want to do. And then Punk did that. And like eventually that sort of clashed. And it just seemed like a bad fit for him, bizarrely, in the end. And now he's doing great in WWE, seemingly because there's a bit more structure there. I don't know. I'm not backstage. I don't exactly know. I'm sure other people are at fault too for that whole thing falling apart. But regardless, it wasn't a good situation for him. So when you take a look at those big names, and then you're left with the guys that are still there today, Hangman Adam Page, MJF, and Darby Allin, along with a bunch of really, really excellent signings like Will Ospreay, Swerve Strickland, Kazuchika Okada, Kyle Fletcher, and Takeshita, not to mention letting Toni Storm roll with some creative freedom and inventing her character and having her elevate the entirety of the women's division along with Mercedes Moné and other names. AEW right now is built to last. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be challenging WWE for the number 1 spot at this point. That's basically impossible. They're owned by a giant billion-dollar company, and I don't think what AEW presents is necessarily meant or is going to appeal to the kind of fan base that WWE has fostered for decades now. Basically, people like the soap opera stuff. I love the soap opera stuff. But AEW focuses on the wrestling, but they've also been able to find a way to tell stories as it relates to the wrestling that are still really compelling. This year, they have been on a roll. And I think by and large, it's because their core now are people who are completely bought in to AEW and understand that if you buy into the company, your own stock will rise. When AEW used to sign people like Malachi Black, Rusev, Miro, Andrade, guys like that, it seemed like they were coming over without like really realizing, hey, I have to sacrifice a little bit. Like Swerve Strickland is a perfect example of this. That dude understood that you can take a lot. He lost a lot when he first came over. And his star ascended because of his losses. He was able to make stories out of his character losing, and he always came out stronger. It was really kind of remarkable that he really cracked the code to AEW having creative freedom that a lot of people weren't able to do. And so basically AEW signed a bunch of people who were all in on AEW. And that's why that recent report of them being like, yeah, we're not going to sign very many former WWE people unless they really fit into what we're doing makes a lot of sense. They have a terrific core right now who seem to work really well with Tony Khan. They've beefed up the women's division and the stories that they're telling, even the Death Riders thing, which a lot of people complained about last year, myself included, because it didn't make a lot of sense, has just sort of morphed into like a normal bad guy has the title and the good guys are chasing after him story, which is just a tried and true pro wrestling trope story that pretty much has always been told since the beginning of, when pro wrestling became storytelling. There was a really good article I read the other day out of WrestleNomics, Brandon Thurston, and he was putting together some numbers in terms of the turnaround in AEW's viewership. I think Tony Khan even posted a graphic of it on Twitter, and it just goes to show if you're a company, a wrestling promotion that has figured out its identity, and you have a roster that buys into what you're doing, and you have stories that make sense, they're logical, and they're playing out at a pace that is easily consumable by your viewers, people will start to tune in little by little, more and more. That's why I personally think AEW is in a better position now in 2025 than they were back in 2021. Will they ever beat WWE? No, but I don't think they really care about that necessarily. I think being just a really good alternative to the number one is a really good spot, especially if they're able to keep on getting television deals. Now, obviously, with how just bizarrely messed up the situation at WBD is right now, who knows what's going to happen next for them. However, as long as they keep doing what they're doing, they're going to be fulfilling their end of the deal. So hopefully they'll continue to succeed, because having more options out there for viewers and having more options out there for wrestlers is never a bad thing. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. We'll see you guys around.